أهلا وسهلا فيكم متابعينا، حلقة جديدة من حلقات شرايها عليا حوارات. اليوم عندي حوار شيق جدا مع دكتور بيتر ينغش من ألمانيا. هو يشتغل حاليا في مصح في ألمانيا وتخصصه المعادن الثقيلة والسموم. فحوارنا بيكون باللغة الإنجليزية، ولكن في الإعدادات في ترجمة تطلع للحوار الكامل، فاضغطوا في الإعدادات على الترجمة عشان تشوفون الحوار اليوم. أهلا وسهلا فيكم. Thank you very much, Dr. Peter, for coming with us today on the show. In the beginning, I just want you to give us a short introduction of yourself. Why are we talking about heavy metals to you?
I'm a general practitioner and I'm specialized in the diagnosis and treatment of toxic metals because it's a very interesting field in medicine. Heavy metals and other metals, toxic metals, play an important role in the development of different diseases. And if we find them and can treat them in a patient, then we have a good tool for the treatment of different illnesses.
Okay, I will jump right in, because this is a topic that's been discussed significantly these days, and people are throwing the word heavy metals left, right, and center, and then you hear different types of diagnosis for heavy metals. So I've heard differing opinions about the best way to detect heavy metals in the body. Some experts are saying hair is the best, some are saying urine or stool. So can you give us your expert opinion on what is the best method to actually find the toxicity level inside the body?
Toxic metals have a half-life time in the human body from 20 to 30 years. So the daily exposure is not high, but the dosage can be high in a few months or years or decades of years. So if you look for the metals in the blood, we only see the exposition at this day or at this moment. If you look in the urine, we only see the excretion of this day, but not of the last 10 years. If you look in hair, we have a material which have a longer storage of metals, but it's not as good as a chelation test with chelators. So we make a provocation test. We give medicaments like DMPS, EDTA, or DMSA, or DTPA, like an infusion, and then we wait for 2 hours, and then we look how much metals are excreted from the urine, and this gives us an insight in the storage of the metals in the human body.
What about the argument that these chelators, once they go into the body, they might actually pull out other metals as well, like important metals or minerals, I mean, that the body actually needs?
It's true, but it's no problem because we can refill the minerals and trace minerals. It's no problem. We give the chelators, and they first bind the metals, and they can also bind magnesium and calcium as well and put them out, but not in a high dosage. We give the dosage of the chelators in proportion to the body weight of the person, and so we get a little minerals out, but we give them back within a few hours after the chelating test.
So where does these substances that the DMPS and these substances that you're infusing, where does it go and fish out these heavy metals from? Are these sitting in the brain? Are they sitting in the fat stores? Where are they?
The chelators bind the toxic metals in the blood and in the soft tissue, of which is below the organs. And so we can lower the storage of the metals which has developed within 20 or 30 years, for example. Usually it's thought that DMPS or other chelators don't have the possibility to detoxify the brain. But my experience is that we can detoxify the brain very well, because we can have successful treatment in patients with multiple sclerosis or with loss of memory or something like this, or depression, for example. And so I know that we can improve the symptoms of the brain or of the mood with the chelators. So I'm convinced that we can detoxify the brain as well as the liver and the kidney.
And if I'm not mistaken, toxins have an affinity for fat stores. Is that correct, or is that just a myth? So they would actually reside in fat stores in the body, including the brain cells, which are have a significant proportion of fat.
The metals can go to every cell in the human body, not only to the fat stores. They displace minerals and trace minerals in the cell, for example, in mitochondria or around the cell, and they can go everywhere.
So what would make for example, somebody who's exposed to mercury or to aluminium, what would determine where that heavy metal resides, which would then cause the disease? So for example, if somebody has mercury overload, what would determine that mercury would go and sit in the brain and then cause Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, where somebody else might be exposed to the same amount of mercury, but it resides somewhere else and it causes a different disease? You know what I mean?
Yes, but it's a different question. It's an interesting question, but the answer is very different, very difficult, because it's not well known. I think that the genetic profile of the person is from importance, and the minerals and trace minerals which has the person. If he has high dosage of calcium, the metals can go very well to the bones. If he has high dosage of iron inside, they can go to the mitochondria. If you have high storage of zinc or magnesium inside, then they can go to other organs. But if the person has not a very good storage of minerals and trace minerals, then the toxic metals can go to these places where the minerals or trace minerals are too low.
And I imagine that these minerals would also, the deficiency in these minerals would also slow down the natural detoxification of the substance, yes. Right? Or vitamins as well.
Yes, you're true.
So could one argue that anybody who has a high heavy metal exposure or high heavy metal load in the body will always be deficient in some things? That's why the liver could not keep up with the excretion of it?
Yes, it can be a deficiency which you can't measure in the blood, but it's a deficiency in the cell. You have a deficiency in the cell from iron, for example, and you have lead or mercury inside, and the mercury and lead makes the damage of the cell. So it's important to detoxify the metals and put in the minerals and trace minerals. It's steps on your way to cure people.
Yes.
To help people.
Well, when I came to Nature Clinic, I did 2 tests. One of them is I did the DMPS infusion, but I also had another result from blood. So I also had mercury load in the blood, measured in the blood, and the infusion seemed to expose a lot more of my heavy metal load, which was measured in the urine for 2 hours after, and the blood didn't seem to have much. So is it more dangerous when it's in the blood? Do people usually have a discrepancy in the results when it comes to these 2 tests? Can you just shed light on the difference between them? Because when I see the blood results, I think, oh, perfect, everything is good. But then you look at the urine results and the exposure is, the load is much higher.
Yes, I said it before, in the blood is only the picture of the last days or hours, for example. So, for example, the half-life time of aluminium in blood is 1 hour, but in the human body 29 years. So if you don't find aluminium or mercury in your blood, it's good for the moment, but it doesn't say anything about the storage from the last 10, 20 or 5 years, for example. So if you make a provocation test, you have the best tool to look inside the body and look how much your excretion of metals is.
Okay, let's take the 2 biggest metals that are in the conversation today, mercury and aluminium. Let's take mercury first, and let's go right into the final stages of mercury toxicity. What do you see in a person who's been exposed to mercury for a long time?
Oh, it's very difficult because mercury can make very much symptoms. For example, problems with concentration or with awareness or with mood, for example. Mercury can as well be a toxic metal for the vessels and for the heart, for example. So it can be a problem for patients with stroke or with myocardial infarction. Mercury as well can be a cause for autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, for example, and can cause, for example, multiple sclerosis. So you can't say Mercury does always the same disease. It's not possible. My opinion is if you have a patient with a chronic disease, then it's in every case makes sense to look how much the metal burden is in this patient, because the metals can be a reason for the illness of this patient in every case.
Let's talk about the sources of mercury. I know I've had this conversation with a lot of dentists, first of all, about mercury amalgam. And some dentists are sold on the concept that it's toxic and have stopped using it. Of course, in some countries it's illegal. It's still legal in the Middle East, at least in this part of the world. So the conversations, some dentists are very much aware of the toxicity of mercury and some aren't. So I keep having this conversation back and forth, but how bad is the exposure from fillings compared to exposure from like tuna fish versus exposure from like injections, like injecting mercury, maybe as a preservative in vaccines? Or there's different exposures to mercury where it goes through the digestive system, and then exposures where it's injected directly into the body. And I think we deal with those differently from these sources, right?
Yes, mercury has only three ways to come into the body. It's from amalgam fillings, it's from fish and products from the sea, and from vaccines. It's true. In Germany, we usually have no mercury in the vaccines. A little vaccines are still there, but we have normally aluminium now inside of the vaccines. Fish you can prevent if you don't eat it, so you have no problems with fish with this mercury if you don't eat fish. But the other source is the metals from the mercury from amalgam fillings. It's a very difficult discussion because it's usually theoretical. But you can measure a patient if his amalgam fillings are a problem for the patients. You can measure mercury in the blood, you can measure it in the urine, you can measure it, is it also in salvia, and you can make a provocation test. And then you see if the amalgam fillings of this person are a problem for this person. And if you find it, then you have a good diagnosis, and then you can make the advice for the dentist to put them out.
Mm. And just a question, because you said that vaccines in Germany are mercury free. What about like flu shots? Are they also mercury free in Germany?
Not all, but usually.
Okay, okay.
Most of the vaccines are free of mercury in Germany now.
Mm. And another question now, if somebody, because I recently, one of my relatives also did the same test, and we discovered very high mercury levels, and there is no mercury there are no amalgam fillings or fish or anything like that. If it is old mercury, let's say from an old vaccine, okay, maybe in childhood, what prevents the body over time from detoxifying it naturally? Because we have a liver and we have a gallbladder and we have all these minerals and vitamins that should be working on a regular basis and detoxifying at least small amounts. What would make it still appear in the body years after the suspected exposure?
First, the genes are possible. The genes, the genetic profile of a person is different in the possibility to detoxify metals. So in Germany, in Europe, for example, 50% of the people have not a very good genetic background for detoxify metals. It would be interesting if there are other sources of mercury in your family, because it's a vaccine 20 years ago, and now you have high dosage of mercury inside. It's a little bit. I'm not sure if it's the only source for the mercury.
What other source would it be? If we said there's 3 sources.
Sorry?
If we said there are only 3 sources, I'm just trying to think what other sources there would be. I mean, could it be in the soil? Could it be, I don't know, where else would it be?
You don't eat fish?
No, very little, very little.
How much is very little?
I mean, that person, no, we're talking like once a month or once every 2 months. And not the very suspect, because we talk about the fish, the types of fish that hold heavy levels of mercury, which is usually tuna and maybe salmon and things. So are there any other fish that you feel are high carriers of mercury?
Every fish is a possibility.
All fish.
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's come from the water and where the fish lives and puts the metals, the mercury inside, and it's not only the tuna or something like this. It's every fish is possible. Is a possible source of mercury.
Okay.
And how much fish you eat 5 years ago, for example? Did you eat more fish 5 years ago?
Possibly. I don't know about this specific case, but yeah, possibly. So you're saying it might be a load from a history of eating something that has a high load.
Yes. If you don't only look for studies which is made with humans, you see that the half-life time of mercury in the human body is up to 25 years. So it's not a problem from a few months or a few years, but the half-life is 25 years. So if you eat fish in the past, mercury is still in your body.
Yeah. Well, this reminds me, let's talk a bit about inheriting mercury in the womb. So mercury exposure during pregnancy, during being a fetus yourself, and absorbing maybe a significant amount of your mother's mercury, because a lot of children maybe present with symptoms in the autism spectrum, and they have not been exposed to that significant amount of mercury, and then when you test them, the mercury comes out very high. So they might have picked up, other than the mercury in the vaccines, they might have also picked up mercury in utero, correct?
Mercury during pregnancy comes to the utero via the amalgam fillings, for example, or via vaccination, or via the fish.
Mm-hmm.
There are studies that in Europe 1.8 million children every year are born with a mercury load which is high and can improve the neurologic development because mothers eat fish during pregnancy.
And can the mother excrete from her stores, or does it have to be recent mercury that she's consuming in order to transfer it to the uterus, to the fetus?
In the case of mercury, it's usually the exposure of the mother during pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other metals which can be set free from the storage for example, from the bone. This is aluminium and first lead. You said we have 2 metals which are interesting. You said aluminium and mercury, but I think lead is more important than mercury because the exposure of lead you can't avoid. You can avoid the exposure from mercury if you don't eat fish and if you don't have amalgam fillings and no vaccination with mercury. But the exposure to lead you can avoid. It's not possible because lead is in the air, lead is in the water, and lead is in the food chain. And every child which is born in Europe or in Asia or in America, all over the world, has contact with lead in the utero because this lead is stored in the bones of the mother, as well as aluminium is stored in the bone of the mother. And during pregnancy there's a high turnover of calcium from the bones, and with calcium also aluminium and lead. So it's a problem for the child in the utero. It has a combined exposure with different metals, usually lead first, possible aluminium, and possible, for example, mercury or cadmium, which is also stored in the bones. So it's sometimes the first step of a long way from diseases from a child which is born if the dosage if the exposure in the uterus is very high to the metals.
And when you say lead is in the air, I mean, I understand it might be in the water, but where would, like pollution? So just like car exhaust fumes and things like that?
Car exhaust, for example, coal firing, for example. And it's the transition of lead is with the air all over the world. You don't have to have a factory near you. It's possible that it's 500 or 5,000 kilometers away from you.
Yes, yes. And let's talk a bit also about the mercury, about the aluminium, I mean, since we're talking about mercury and lead and aluminium. Aluminium seems to be, I mean, I read an article recently about childhood Alzheimer's, which is now becoming a thing, which is very disturbing, to be honest, because Alzheimer's was not in the past a childhood disease. So there was a question of aluminium and possibly also mercury. So let's talk about children's exposure to aluminium first of all, and what it could cause in children.
Food is a very common source of aluminium in children and in all other people. Aluminium is in the food, like in colors of food, for example, or in preservative production from food, and it can always also be a part of vaccination. Aluminium can be a part of vaccination and can be a part of the food.
And you're saying food colorings, as in the colored foods that they sell to children, like colored drinks, and those would contain aluminium as well?
Yes.
Okay, okay. And what would you... sorry, go ahead.
The European Agency of Food Safety said if you don't know where aluminium is inside and you go to the supermarket and buy everything you can buy and you're hungry about and you eat it, then you have a too high dosage of aluminium inside. So it's usually in nearly, not in every food, but in most of the produced foods. And
well,
the food is
yes, definitely the children are exposed. But let's talk about then, again, I keep asking this question, but then the difference between exposure to aluminium, I guess aluminium is also in a lot of medication, right? There's some medicines that contain aluminium in them. Let's talk about the difference between aluminium exposure via food or medicines that go through the digestive system and injected aluminium that is now prevalent in almost all vaccines.
If you have aluminium in the food, then it's about 1% of the aluminium in the food which you take in your body. Only 1%, or a little bit more, a little bit low, it's not so different. But if you have a vaccination, you have an input in the body from 100%.
Yes.
So it's a great difference. It's a great difference, yes.
And the rate of safe levels of aluminium versus the current levels that children are exposed to?
Sorry?
The difference between what is safe, what is considered safe exposure, safe levels of aluminium versus what children are actually getting today. It's much higher than the safety level, right? Not that there's anything safe in aluminium to take.
Yes, it's a very different question, because what is safe? It's a good question.
Yes.
If you don't look only for aluminium, for example in a vaccination or in food, then you can have a limit what is safe or what is not safe. But it's not the daily life. The daily life is the exposure to different metals from the beginning, before you was born in the body, until the last day you are living in this earth, of this earth. So there are different studies which show that if you have two different metals at the same time, there are no safe limits. You don't know what is safe. You have no
safety limit.
No.
So what is where do you see this going?
Sorry?
How do you see this happening in the future? I mean, we are exposing children to a lot more aluminium than is safe. Would you say that all children need a detoxification program that they get put on in addition to everything else that they're doing?
If they are ill, in every case, if they prevent disease, it makes sense to treat people if they are not ill before they become ill. Not every dosage of every metal makes symptoms in the human body, it's true. But we see 100% more cancer, for example, in 20 years. We see 100% more Alzheimer's disease within 20 years, and we see 400% more allergies within 30 years, for example. So there must be reasons for these diseases which are overlooked, and I think metals are one of the reasons.
So I'm going to ask you about specific diseases, and if you can tell me from your experience, and I know from each case it would be different, but from your experience, autism, for example, are there specific metals that you see repeating in autism cases?
In autism is like in every other case. We usually look for 3, 4 or 30 different metals. So in children with autism, you find usually lead, you can find mercury, aluminium, tin, tungsten, cadmium, nickel, copper, and all these things. It's not only one metal which can cause aluminium, or which can cause autism, or which can cause Alzheimer's disease. The discussion if aluminium causes Alzheimer's disease is not a good discussion, because aluminium is not the only problem in the human body. It's always the combined problems of aluminium, lead, and mercury and other metals. And the question is, can metals as a general cause Alzheimer and autism? And I think yes, they can.
And would your protocol for children be similar as that of adults? Same, I mean, do you go by weight, but would you also do the urine, the DMPS urine for children, or would you opt for more gentle ways of chelation?
In my office I do the intravenous therapy and look for in the urine, because it's the most safe therapy and the most exact therapy.
And it's really a chelation and a test at the same time. So even while you're testing, you're removing, correct?
Yes. Yes.
The
test is a treatment. It's very good.
The test is a treatment.
Yes, and some people feel better after the test because it was the first treatment.
Yeah. And what is the time frame, like in a child with autism? Roughly, I mean, I know you can't answer exactly this question, but roughly, are we talking about 6 chelation treatments? Are we talking about 1 and they would improve? Are we talking about 3 years, 1 year? Because I know there's a lot of mothers of autistic children following this program also, and you know how a autistic mother would do anything for her child. So are we talking about, like, what is the time frame and what is the extent of the therapy?
It depends from the kind of autism. It can be a mild case of autism, or it can be a very severe kind of autism. You can have success with 10 or 20 treatments, and you have success with 40 or 50 or 60 treatments, so it is different. And you have not always success with detoxification of metals. You can't say autism is only a problem of metals, and if you put the metals out, the children get sane. It's not possible. In the single case, it is possible, but not. You can not say it in general.
Yeah. And is it safe to assume that once you have an autistic child that you've measured for heavy metals, is it safe to assume that you would then advise them to stop further exposure to these metals?
Yes, if it's possible. If it's possible.
If it's possible in their case, to stop exposure to more vaccines, for example.
Yes, you have to look where comes the aluminium from, where comes the lead from, are there any paints in the house, where comes the tungsten from. They have to discuss with the mother and look for the sources, yes.
Yes. Okay, what about cancer as a disease? I know this is the disease of the century, let's say, or of the decade even, with more and more younger patients.
Yes.
Any particular toxin that you see that is more dominant than others in cancers?
You always find lead, and lead is probably a carcinogenic metal for humans. It's now known since a few years that lead can cause cancer, and you find lead in every people you measure. It's always there. Sometimes you don't find mercury, sometimes you don't find aluminium, but always you find lead, and lead is possible a carcinogenic metal for humans. Aluminium have different ways how can it damage the DNA, for example, and the repair mechanism of the DNA, so aluminium is a possible cofactor for cancer. Mercury can cause free radicals, for example, and can damage the DNA, for example, and it's also a possibility, a possible metal to cause cancer. So the International Agency for the Research of Cancer has a list for metals which are known carcinogenic for humans, and a list which are probably carcinogenic for humans. And known is, for example, cadmium and arsenic, and some nickel compounds. And possible is, for example, lead and mercury.
So
the research on metals and cancer is 20, 30, 50 years old, and some decades ago there was a researcher in America, Emily Madden, and she said if you have different metals which are not high, then you can cause cancer because they can combine, damage the cell. So you have no safe limit of the metals. They can cause cancer. It's not that they must always in every patient cause a disease or cause cancer, but in a person which is, for example, genetic determined or something like this, it can be the reason for this disease, even if the level is not very high.
That was going to be my next question, actually, because I'm working on a cancer series at the moment where I interview different people, different experts' approach to cancer, and each expert has a different approach. So I imagine that a cancer patient that comes to you, you would first look at heavy metals because that's your specialty, right?
Yes, but it's not the first line treatment. The detoxification is a base treatment for the reason of the metals, for the reason of the cancer. And it's important to improve the other therapies you are doing against cancer, but it's not a therapy against cancer, it's a therapy against the cause of cancer.
Yeah, so you're basically removing the toxins so that you're helping the body heal itself, so that it can heal itself.
And combine it with other therapies which are against the cancer.
Yes, I agree. So if somebody does not have access to your DMPS at the moment, what lifestyle methods can you recommend? Would maybe high dose vitamin C or I don't know, coriander juice, for example, has been discussed significantly as a heavy metal detoxifier. Some experts say it's too weak to actually go and collect these metals. Are there any things that we can do throughout our day-to-day to reduce our load if we have a load at the moment?
It's a different question. It's a difficult question because it's metals. In the vaccination, for example, you can prevent them. They are inside the body and they can damage the body in different ways. But if you have a high dosage of good minerals and trace minerals, for example, like I said before, iron and calcium and zinc and selenium and magnesium, then you have a natural prevention against aluminium in vaccination, for example, or against other metals from food, for example. So it's very important to look for the minerals and trace minerals, to go to your doctor, for example, and have a check and look that it's not on the ground level, but that on the high level. You need enough magnesium, you need enough iron, not only a little bit. Then water is another way how you can improve your detoxification every day. If you drink enough water every day and it's good water, then you can improve the detoxification of the metals which you get in contact this day. If you put something if you do something for your liver, for example, or for your kidney, or for your immune system and for your intestine, then you then you do something to prevent the intake of metals as well.
So give us a quick, maybe a list of things that people should go and test for in terms of minerals. So you're saying they should test for iron, because iron as a mineral is important, and I assume ferritin as well as a storage iron is also relevant in this case, correct? Should they test for B12? Is it vitamin D? I mean, I know they should test for everything, but I mean, what are the big ones that you feel play a role in the heavy metal detox that they should at least make sure they're at a good level of, or at the higher end level of?
Magnesium, calcium, iron, zinc, selenium, in some cases copper, but copper can also be a burden of the body, so it's not reasonable in every case. Vitamin D is very important, vitamin B12 is very important. Amino acids are important because amino acids have the possibility to detoxify the body, like cysteine or taurine, for example. So these are very good players in the human body, the amino acids, for a good liver function, for good brain function, and for detoxification of metals.
And my last question, are you happy with people supplementing these minerals and vitamins, or because there's a big question mark on vitamin D supplements these days because it puts supposedly a load on the liver because it's a hormone. So should they be looking at supplementing from natural sources, or can they actually take good quality supplements for these once they find the deficiencies?
There are some pharmacies which produce good vitamins and amino acids, and I think you can trust them, and then you can buy them. But not every product with vitamin D or something or zinc or magnesium is good, because sometimes titanium is inside the minerals, or aluminium is inside the minerals in the products you can buy. So you have to look for a good producer, and then you can eat them, because it's not very easy to put all the minerals and amino acids and trace minerals from the food.
Yeah, and there's today some supplement companies that claim that their spirulina, for example, or their sea algae is clean, so that it's been cleaned from heavy metals. Is there any truth to that?
I sent some of these clean algae in the laboratory and find 120,000 micrograms aluminium inside and 850 nickel and lead and mercury, so don't trust them. Yeah. They have some certificates on the product, and we are very clean, and we are from Germany and no problem at all. But if you send them to the laboratory, you find high amounts of aluminium and other metals. So if you want to take these algae, please send them to a good laboratory, which you know, and look for your own if it's a good product or not. But in my experience, most of the algae products are full of metals.
Dr. Peter, thank you so much. I have so many more questions, but I want to respect your time as well, and I would love to have another conversation with you in the future at some point. If I understand correctly, you have a book out about this subject. Can you tell us the name of your book?
I wrote 3 books. One is, but they're all in German, so I think.
They're in German. Okay. Okay, maybe one day when my German improves.
I gave a speech before the Council of Europe, and I can send them to you. I have it in English and I have it in Arabic speech.
Oh, okay, perfect. Because I was looking up some of your videos on YouTube before we had this conversation, and they were all in German. And my German is not yet good enough. I was able to pick up bits and pieces, but I would love to have anything of your knowledge in a language that I can understand.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it, and I look forward to having more of these conversations.
Yes, I would like it too. Good luck for you and your work.
Thank you very much. شكرا لمتابعتكم. إذا عندكم أسئلة للدكتور نفسه حطوها في التعليقات تحت، وإن شاء الله نبدأ نتوعى ونفهم هذا الموضوع شوي أعمق في المستقبل. شكرا لكم.